Now, as you know, the boss of Woolies has decided to retire, to resign, to quit. And apparently it had absolutely nothing to do with external forces, such was the spin out of the company today. It had nothing to do with the fact that on Monday night the CEO was storming out of interviews with the ABC, who were pushing the union line that supermarkets are just more about profit than they are about prices, and prices are too high because the organisations want to make profit. But of course, anyone who walks away from an interview, it's always a bad look. And the idea that he walked away, well, it all resulted, of course, in him now losing the job, walking away from it, retiring. But either way, he's not going to be around for much longer in the job. Now, I've got to say I'm happy he's gone, because I didn't like what his company did when it came to Australia Day. Not because of their decision to stock or not stock stuff for Australia Day, but the way in which they paraded their decision. That they were playing for woke points and they were punished by the consumer. So they've been copying it from all angles, and the CEO is gone. So good riddance. I hope whoever returns, if they don't bring back the merchandise, at the very least doesn't try to rub people's noses in it and then spends more time celebrating Lunar New Year than our own National Day. But such is the big woke corporates. But speaking about supermarkets, and we know right now that, again, just as they tried with the former Reserve Bank governor, this government is going to again try to pretend that they have nothing to do with inflation, nothing at all to do with increased taxes on things like heavy vehicles, which means the products that end up turning up in supermarkets end up costing more money. Nothing at all to do with the cost of employees, nothing to do at all with the transition to renewable energies, which of course has pushed up power prices as we move from the system that works to the one that, fingers crossed, will into the future. So the current pinata is to get the people who were in charge of Grocery Watch under the Rudd and Gillard governments to now be the ones that will be using the bully pulpit to wave their fingers at the supermarkets in the way they used to wave their fingers at Qantas. But then there are the Greens. And the Greens have yet again shown us that they are the party of protest, and there are very small likelihoods that they will ever get into a position where they actually have responsibility. Influence, sure, they got it in the Senate. They'll probably have it after the next election in a minority government. But what about this for an idea in the free market country that is Australia? The Victorian Greens want to pass laws to make sure that supermarket prices are set not by the supermarket, not by the companies that sell their things in supermarkets, but instead by the government. There was press conferences and everything to make this very point, suggesting that how much toilet paper or bread costs should be decided by the government as if it was the 1990s and Soviet Russia. In fact, here they are making the point a bit earlier today in Victoria.
We've got Vegemite, $9.40 spread for some sandwiches, and a block of cheese, $13.90. Frankly, the status quo right now is not good enough. We need governments to take action on this.
Again, the holding up stuff and saying how expensive it is not an argument as to why the state should step in and start setting price controls. But it is a reminder to us about the Greens and the reality of what they bring behind their supposed environmentalism. As I've spoken to you before, I think that this current generation and the next generation of Greens are going to try to use the rental situation in Australia to cover their true want to control free markets. Perfect example, where they are turning around and saying in the Brisbane City Council elections that there should be a 2-year rent freeze and guarantee not $1 increases on rents in any rental property in Brisbane. Now, of course, the reason why rent goes up, apart from the demand for the property, is that the cost of paying off the property, if you are the property investor, has increased. It has increased 13 times since this government came to power. That's what interest rates are. And yes, while there is a tax benefit at the end of the year, in the difference between the money that you get in rent versus what you have to pay off when it comes to a mortgage via negative gearing, the reality is that you've got to have enough money to make it through the 12 months. But the Greens' idea is to just simply say, no, if you own a property and somebody else rents it, you should have to bear more of the cost as the cost of paying off the property increases. Now, these are also the people who believe that everything can be funded by just shaking your nearest monocle-wearing, cigar-chomping, top-hat-wearing billionaire. They want to make sure that billionaires pay a specific rate of tax, and by the way, not just on the money that they make in any one year, but on the assets that they own. They also believe that corporations should pay their fair share of tax, and who would dare disagree with that? But when you actually look at the methodology that they put into that particular statement, it shows that they know less about how economics works than a kid who is studying it at high school today. You see, they want to also introduce a thing called a super profits tax. Now, this theoretically goes after a bank, a supermarket, anything that's earning a particular amount of money. But have a look here. A 40% super profits tax on corporations with more than $100 million turnover in Australia is what they are trying to put in place. Now, automatically you go, $100 million. Paul, what are you talking about here? Well, of course, the difference between turnover and profit is rather significant. Now, again, just to educate the Greens, turnover is every single dollar that goes through the till. But of course, there are expenses that mean income after expenses. The money that's left over is what's profit. Now, for a business that turns over $100 million, they don't make $100 million profit. I can't think of an industry where that would be the case. Instead, it is a percentage of the $100 million that is left over as profit. Now, if the business is listed on the stock market or has shareholders, it is the shareholders through a dividend who are given a portion of the profits. Otherwise, part of the profit is used to expand the business. You don't need to borrow money for a bank if you have cash on hand to be able to build a new warehouse, buy more trucks or hire more people. But in the world of the Greens, there is a scenario where you already pay your corporate tax, you pay your payroll tax, and then just depending on the size of the turnover, you would pay another 40% on top of that. Now, again, to the Greens or lefties, they'll all just be nodding their heads and saying thanks for pointing out our policies. But the reality is they are unworkable. But we have seen other political parties, like the Victorian Labor Party, also institute taxes and levies, not on profit, but on turnover. Now, this will result in smaller companies, or if they have the ability, companies of that size moving their headquarters to another place in the country, or, sadly, for many companies, they would try to find a way to shift their monies offshore. Too many companies do that. And sure, not enough companies pay the full amount of tax. But the Greens live in this world where they believe in not equality, but they believe in equity, which is that everyone has the same experience at the end of the day, no matter whether you put in no effort or all the effort in the world. Everyone ends up in the same place. Now, 30% of people under the age of 35 plan to vote Green at the next election. There will be people who will vote Green at the next election because they think they're the only political party that is fighting for renters. But I hope people actually understand what the consequences are beyond things like price controls that will never actually come to pass. And again, God forbid if these people end up in a scenario where, as the polls would tell us, the Labor Party heads towards a minority government after the next federal election, and they have control in both the lower and the upper house for the government to do anything, where the Prime Minister would be reduced even further to not making decisions in the interests of the country, but instead just doing stunts to make us look like he understands or cares.